but he is
No.
certainly more intelligent than Tim Pool. And I think the difference between him and Tim Pool is that
Aren't we all?
he is, yeah, well, yeah, it's kind of a given. But Alex Jones, he's kind of, whether it's like a raw intellect or whatever, he's the innovator in this field, right? You have to give him some intellect points for that because he's the originator of this entire thing.
So hello and welcome to Beyond Binary Thinking. This is our attempt to go beyond the binary narratives, tribalism and ego in the discourse of politics and current events with the hope of finding more radical ideas. Today, however, we are going to be slightly more tribalistic than usual. I want to look at alt-right, sometimes they're called alt-light, but mostly right-wing YouTubers, and just put them on a tier. Various rankings. Before I explain our tier system, I'd like to introduce our wonderful guest today. We have Jacob from Big Yellow Praxis, a wonderful YouTube channel I strongly recommend you follow, and Mal Foster from the Dimed Out podcast.
Hello.
Gentlemen, how are you both? Yeah, no, thanks for coming. This should be fun. Like, I think these people are intensely silly, but also have a massive effect on the world, unfortunately. So I think it's worth discussing them. So how do we score people we hate? I think it's important to go into this as unbiased, impartial judges. So the number one thing I'd like to score them on is the grift, the con, how disingenuous we think they're being, how good they are at sophistry, right? And how good they are at verbal sleight of hand, shall I say, right?
I think this could be where we disagree a lot, because I think this is a lot down to interpretation. It's this is very complex, and there's a few people in here, I look at them and I disagree with myself yesterday. You know what I mean? Like now, think, oh no, they're definitely a grifter. Oh no, they fully believe it. So I think this one's quite complicated.
I love putting this list together because half of these people, my opinion, as you say, has changed on 4 times in the last couple of years. Like, how about yourself, Mal? Did you ever used to be a fan of any alt-right YouTubers?
Strangely enough, no. A lot of this is kind of peripheral. Like, I know a number of these people by name, by face, in some instances by content that just kind of finds itself into my general algorithm. But this is kind of, to a degree, uncharted territories. So, yeah, just to kind of manage your audience's expectations. I will probably not be as well informed. I'll be the opinionated oik of the group.
That's probably for the best. And just for anyone concerned about the mental health of our guests, I only ask people to look into 2 of these YouTubers to avoid too much exposure to bad thoughts. So the second thing I'd like... Sorry, mate, go for it.
I was going to say, my problem is I'm very well acquainted, I think, with all of them. The only one I ever would have counted myself a fan of was Sam Harris, who is... I'm of the right age where the kind of him and Christopher Hitchens and all those kind of people, when they first kind of got big, the 4 horsemen of atheism or whatever. I saw a lot of that stuff on YouTube. I was like 14, 15 at the time. I remember watching tons of those videos. I still think a lot of them are funny. Christopher Hitchens, whatever you want to say about the guy and what he turned into his late years, always very funny.
Super.
Sam Harris kind of went off the rails for me. I don't know when exactly, but it kind of went a little bit awry, I think.
Yeah, I think it's the sort of like, what do they call it? The conveyor belt to the right is often via these like atheist videos, because they start off being like, religion's dumb, and you're like, yes, and then like, but Islam in specific, and we need to be careful, and we need to bomb every country in the Middle East that won't send us a Christmas card, and you're like, whoa, you skipped a few steps there. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So speaking of Sam Harris, we will be scoring some of these gentlemen on Intellect. And ladies, there aren't many right-wing females, although we should find a couple. A few spring to mind. But yes, Intellect's a big one. I don't know. Obviously, there's intellect and wisdom, so there is room for some debate there.
True. I think this is a little bit less thorny than the grift. Grift is hard to work out. I think for most most of these people, they're quite clearly a bit stupid. I think there's one or two where I think it's, yeah, I still think there could be a bit of disagreement, but I think it's a bit clearer on Intellect.
Yes, with some obvious examples that'll be fun to highlight. And finally, like how dangerous they actually are to society. So, yeah, as funny as it is how silly some of these figures are, they are very present, and they do spend a lot of time espousing some quite strange ideas. So, yeah, let's see whether they're actually responsible for the downfall of society, or whether that is just left-wing hysteria clutching at pearls. So, without further ado, as you can see, there's some wonderful people here. We won't have the time to get through everyone this episode, but yeah, over time, I'm going to keep inviting some guests on to discuss some of these strange and bizarre figures. Some classics there: Sargon of Akkad, Ben Shapiro, Nigel Farage.
So exhausting just looking at them, to be honest.
I don't want to know how many hours of my life I've wasted watching videos of all the people on this panel, but it is in the hundreds, no doubt.
It is strange that I've probably watched more by these people than I have of left-wing people, possibly. I don't know. It's hard to kind of to break it down, but possibly. With the exception of like Nigel Farage, who I don't think I've only ever seen him on the news really, and the occasional thing. But some of these people, I don't know. We'll get into it. But some of these people are genuinely, in spite of the grift, the lack of intellect, and the menace to society, some of them are genuinely very entertaining, but potentially, well, almost certainly for the wrong reason.
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting debate to be had there. Like left tube, you kind of have to search out, right? Like, and these people forever say the left-wing bias of media, but definitely, especially 10 years ago, I felt all these people won by the algorithm. And yeah, there's a debate to be had. Some of them, I think they were intentionally looking to push a political agenda. Some of them, I think, actually found it through the algorithm. Who do we want to start with? Because yeah, before I get into general academic terms, let's deep dive on someone. So
I could happily start with anyone, although I do see Tim Pool's perfectly shined dome staring right at me.
Yeah, when you see this photo, you realize why he wears a hat.
No offense to our follically challenged listeners.
But all offense intended for Tim Pool. So yeah, I mean, brilliant jumping off point, because I think from everything I've read about Tim Pool, he's one of the few on this list that isn't backed by some right-wing think tank, Cato Institute, Koch brothers. He just found through the algorithm that his more racist stuff did better and got more clicks. So like the algorithm trained him like a Pavlovian dog to be the racist cunt that he is.
Well, Tim Pool's very interesting because it's not even just about the racism. It's about like the way he sets himself up as. And I mean, I've talked to tons of people. I waste a lot of my time like debating like pure right-wing authoritarians and just all kinds of wacky people across the political spectrum online, and a lot of right-wing people genuinely think that Tim Pool is left-wing.
Well, he presents himself constantly, right?
But this is the interesting thing. The only way he presents himself as left-wing is by occasionally saying, "I'm left-wing." That's all that happens. That's the only thing he does. And
he was covering what was it called? Occupy Wall Street.
Okay,
right, but like most of his career, most of his career, he spent the entire time over egging things. So if you look at his CV, he says like he was a senior fundraiser for a charity, and then you fact check that, and they're like, he worked for us for 4 weeks. Like so it's all over egged, right?
Yeah. But it's a huge barrier. It's always been a huge barrier to me talking to like very right-wing, particularly. I think his audience is predominantly American. Some of these are a little bit more international or transatlantic. Tim Pool is very American. Every time you talk to a certain type of very right-wing American, they will always lean back on Tim Pool agrees with me on this, and he's like he's a lefty, he's a leftist, and I'm just like I feel like you almost feel like you have to deprogram these people from thinking that Tim Pool is clearly not a leftist. In no world is he even a centrist. I mean,
Well, it's quite interesting that half of the people we're looking at today all claim to be left, and they say, "I didn't leave the left left me," because it's
yes,
crazy,
yes, yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
the
yeah.
that's the grift.
That is the grift. That is the grift. Yeah, yeah.
Indeed. So there's some great stories of Tim from his former colleagues, right? So anytime he was a reporter, they would say that he was very reluctant to leave the hotel room, was busy on Twitter saying how brave he was and was in the war zone, but wouldn't actually want to leave his hotel room at all. And he was always, gaming the social media. And so sure enough, he's found all the success he's wanted. Yeah, and you can just tell it resonates very well, right? I'm not a biased partisan person. I used to be on the left, and I realize that everything they say is nonsense. So it works both ways, right? He gets to be held up as this paragon of impartiality, and everyone gets to hide behind him as a human shield, saying, "Oh no, like I'm not right wing. I follow reasonable moderates such as Tim Pool." And I just challenge anyone to find any issue he's ever been left wing on ever.
Yeah, I do think he's really taken that Occupy Wall Street thing to the bank really well, and he does it so effectively. I just need to quickly Google Tim Pool YouTube, because his YouTube channel has what, over 1 million subscribers.
More. He's one of the biggest. He's come out of nowhere. He's got billions of views. It's crazy.
Yeah.
He's bigger than Gangnam Style at this point.
He's at 1.31 million subscribers as of today. Every video gets, I'm looking at like a quarter to a third of a million every video, and he churns them out at an almost impressive rate. Almost impressive, because obviously the content is dreadful, but it's just the grift. I mean, I'm kind of answering this first category, right? The grift is phenomenal.
It's impressive.
And I'm kind of getting onto the second one. It's not born out of any sense of intellect whatsoever, because he's such an idiot.
That's secondary, right?
Yeah. But the grift is unbelievable.
Have you encountered him at all, Mal? Like, avoided the plague?
No, I haven't.
So I'm very new to Tim Pool, but he was the one that inspired me to make this episode, because my favorite rapper, right, like R.A. the Rugged Man.
Good choice.
Yeah, you know him. It's a great guy. Check him out. And he went on.
I don't know rap, so I'm just
okay. I recommend you check it out. Like he's a brilliant rapper, very funny, very charming. And he went on Tim Pool's episode, and it went so badly that the episode got deleted. Oh. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, I had to find it. And of course, these days, because it's all live streamed, you can find it somewhere. And I watched Tim Pool, and like a lot of people claiming to be centrist, you're like, okay, but you start to notice the same talking points and how he's always pushing right of Fox News even agenda. So you're like, okay, it's very similar to Stephen Crowder, sourced from the same material, sort of thing.
Okay.
But yeah, the big one is very few of his guests have been able to keep up with him, because he's very good at just pulling random facts out of his ass. And, but what about this case of obscure person you haven't heard? And the person's like, what? And then, gotcha, I've just won this argument. Like how they all win arguments, right? It's just nonsense. Sophistry over substance. But yeah, R.A. the Rugged Man just took him to task really clearly and calmly over the 3 people that had African Americans that had been killed by the police, and how he'd covered that story and was trying to victim blame them and falsely spin this narrative. And he was just like, no. And then Tim Pool went really weird and sort of like, he does this usually, like accused R.A. the Rugged Man of being racist to him because he's Asian American and everyone's racist towards white people. And then said, you're just some liberal cuck, as he always shoots people down. He said it to the wrong person, because this guy just got up and was just ready to start swinging punches at him. And then Tim Pool, as he always does, dramatically back down and just folded like a fucking deck chair and immediately deleted the video from his page. It was just brilliant. So, but no, really seriously, when you look into how he covers the murder of African Americans by the police, and how biased his reporting is, how biased his reporting was towards Kyle Rittenhouse. He's always defending people murdering African Americans with talking points that you can only find from the far right. Right, like that these people deserved it and they were criminals, and not a minute of journalistic integrity would hold up to the claims he's strongly making. And I recommend everyone look into Tiny Temper does a brilliant video about how the nonsense he talks to pretend he's centrist, but he's always pushing, like I say, a narrative further right of than Fox News even would be prepared to do. And the obvious example is in the Capitol Hill riots, where he knew what was going on, and continues to push misinformation around that, and how there shouldn't be an inquiry into it because it's not a big deal. It's just some guys having fun. You accidentally killed a policeman, right. but when an African American gets killed for jogging, he's like, "Whoa, yeah, but we need to look more into the facts, right? It's complicated."
Mm-hmm. I feel like Tim Pool he must have like the best audience analytics, because you can tell it's purely driven by that. And I'm not trying to absolve, not that it would absolve him. I'm not trying to absolve him of like racist intention. He feels to me 100% grift. That doesn't obviously excuse.
I don't sense a lot of intellect.
There isn't even a connection. It's just he just does it because money, and
he's the personification of the YouTube algorithm, right?
Yes, he is. He is actually. He is. He's absolutely. Yeah.
Of the YouTube comments come to life.
I do feel like maybe we need a fourth criteria, which could be like how entertaining they are, because for me, Tim Pool, I'll just put my cards on the table. I feel grift. He's like 5 out of 5. He's pure grift.
Yeah, I agree on that. I'd score
if we're rating out of 5 or 10,
fully on grift. Yeah. Well, he's the Don. Look at his stats, right?
Exactly. Intellect, like I guess you'd have to give him a 1 because he's not literally brain dead, right? But he's close enough to it. I mean, he can barely function as far as I can tell intellectually. Menace to society, I would rate him very highly as well.
Yeah, it's tough because obviously he's good at the grift, but you can't give him bonus points in another category because he scores so highly in one, right? Like, I don't think anything he says is, what's the opposite of disingenuous? He's just so dishonest.
Is a lot of his opinions forced just by blunt force, just opinion. Like you on about like him pulling out facts here and whatnot. How much of his cases that he states in his content is actually research based, or is it just?
It's always claiming it's research based, but it's always obscure. So sources tell me it's right. That sort of like he just has to pull it out of his ass. Like
allegedly, it was reported as
Yeah, but not only that. Like sometimes I've seen things where he will like look at either a news story or even like a primary or kind of like source or even like scientific research, but his reading comprehension is so poor that he might read like a title or something like that, and then he'll skip. I've seen videos of people like talking about him, and he will literally skip past a paragraph that disagrees with him, or he'll read half of it, get to the sentence that it says, it's a conclusion that he disagrees with, and just quickly ignore it and move past it. But he's churning out so much material that anyone who watches him on a regular basis isn't necessarily. It's not the kind of media that most people who watch him are paying super close attention to. So. Most people are not applying that level of critical thinking to it. So they just hear, oh, look, I know this guy that I'm watching is reading a scientific paper or a news story, and then they're not paying attention to the fact he will literally skip a paragraph that disagrees with him or something like that.
I saw a meme that I think perfectly summarizes Tim Pool, and it's like, scientists discover that the media covers scientific papers so poorly, it renders them meaningless. And then the media's like, science is meaningless. And Tim Pool just is the embodiment of that fallacy. It's incredible.
He really is. He absolutely is.
Menace Society, I think just because of his reach, it's going to have to score highly. You were saying, sorry, Jacob?
I think he's one of that. If he's not the highest, I think he's up there. For me, he is absolutely one of them. Not just because of the reach. I guess it is always down to the reach at the end of the day. But he is so effective at pushing and justifying that narrative to people. I've seen other people who are clearly like right-wing lunatics who will say to me, hey, look, I'm actually left-wing. I've always been a liberal, and the left went too far, and now the left is obsessed with the transgenders and critical race theory. And I'm just sitting there like, you're not left wing. Just be honest about this fact. But it gives so much ammunition to people like that as well. And I think again 5 out of 5 or something, whatever we're rating it out of.
So we have a difficult one then. We're scoring him 5 out of 5 on 2 categories, 1 out of 5 on 1. Does that put him in S tier or A tier?
I think it puts him in A. I think he's certainly A tier.
Yeah, he could be smarter, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we'll have to revise it at the end. I don't know.
I just hate him too much to put him in S tier. Like, there's nothing worse than getting ranked the second most evil person in society.
Yeah.
I think he'd enjoy being an S tier, triggering us libs as he likes to do. So, Tim, we have a lukewarm response to you. We're mildly triggered. We're not that bothered.
Probably piss him off more the fact he's getting a lukewarm reception.
Yep.
The reason I was going to say, I suggested how entertaining they are as a category as well, because some of the people on this list are just as horrendous, if not more so than Tim.
True.
But they're actually more entertaining. Tim is, I've watched plenty of his stuff, but it's actually very hard to watch because he's a kind of charisma void. He's actually not charming. He's not witty. He's actually just kind of uninteresting, unfunny, really inarticulate. Some of them.
His points. He spends an hour making a lukewarm milquetoast. Maybe Black Lives Matter aren't heroes, and you're like, okay, Tim, whatever.
So I don't know. It's up to you, obviously. But for entertainment, I'd give him like a 1 as well. He manages to be utterly unentertaining.
I'm adding that as a category, and for that, he's going to have to go down to B tier, right?
Right, fair enough.
Dropped his spot. I have to ask, why do you think he is so popular then? Like, if he is kind of such a charisma vacuum, and his points kind of just seem to meander to a degree, what is it that is giving him his growth? Obviously, you've mentioned like he's following analytics, which is a worrying trend I'm seeing in a couple of places. Weirdly enough, and this is a total sidebar tangent, Russell Brand, of all people, seems to be kind of reading analytics and being like, hey, guess what kind of videos will get me more views?
Yeah, no, it's shifted him right. You can see that. And we will talk about him on a future episode.
But,
actually, Russell Brand interviewing Tim Pool was Russell Brand jumping the shark for me.
Really?
Like, it was a step too far. He gave a very...
Oh, my God.
He did a very positive interview with Tim Pool, sympathizing with how the left are crazy, and Tim, thanks so much for speaking truth to power. And that was me. Like, I actually cancelled my Luminary subscription that day because I was like, no, sorry, Russell.
I have to say, you know how there's always some smug asshole who's like, oh, a celebrity does something wrong and someone says I always hated them. Well, I am that smug asshole. I could never stand that like transparently pseudo-intellectual blathering fucking idiot. Always hated that guy.
At his peak, right? Like talking to Paxman, siding with Jeremy Corbyn at an important point. Right. He had a very good writer then, I happen to know. And I think that was when he was good.
That's fair. I remember at the time being like, oh, maybe I should reassess this, and saying it to a few people. But then, the last few years have vindicated me, so I'm still a smug asshole. So.
Congratulations. Yeah, no, I agree. Entertainment's an important 4th category, so we'll add that to the mix and the consideration. Okay, enough.
I was just going to say, I do think part of the reason Tim Pool is so big is because so many people can watch it and kind of say that they are also like Tim. I think it makes them feel that he's an everyman. It's obviously it also makes them feel like they're consuming a broad range of media from across the political spectrum. This is obviously only based on people I've talked to, and it's probably a small sample, but people repeatedly say that. It's like, well, I watch left-wing media and right-wing media. I watch Fox News and Tim Pool, and you're like, oh god.
Yeah. No, there's a few channels that do this well. Be like, I mean, it's the point of our show. We're non-partisan, beyond binary thinking tribalism, and it does ring very well with people who are like, oh, everyone else is watching mainstream media biased news, whereas I found an unbiased source of truth. I think also I've noticed a lot with this pattern. Most of the people that consume media are very young or very old, right? Like most people our age don't have a lot of time for this shit people that are actually working. So yeah, like Tim Paul, I would guess most of his fan base are like 15. I find it very similar with, if you know Vosh and Destiny,
Yeah. So
right?
I mean, I've watched bits of the. I mean, we're not getting into rating left wing stuff, but Vosh.
Well, that's another episode. We'll do that.
Vosh he definitely has a very young,
Yeah.
skewing audience for sure. Yeah, and you could tell watching him because he's a very good, like, actor. I don't even necessarily mean that in a disparaging way. He knows what his audience is, and I sometimes watch it and I'm like, I feel very weird because this is clearly directed at 13-year-olds, and then I have to kind of switch it off. But sometimes he'll debate someone and it's hilarious or something.
Like Joe Rogan used to be back in the day. I feel like these people are like, if you ever had like a friend that had a cool older brother who would get you weed, and you always thought that guy was so cool, but now in hindsight, you're like, he was smoking weed with 14-year-olds. So probably not that cool. Yeah. But at the time, he was like, oh my God, he's so good. And he would tell you his crazy conspiracy theories. And that's what these people are.
Right. That is Joe Rogan.
Yeah, that really is.
All right, let's move on from the shallow end of the pool. Who shall we have next? Milo, Sam Harris, Dave Rubin, or Alex Jones?
Oh, someone else can choose. I'm happy to go with any of them.
Let's go with the only remaining intellectual in the group. So let's go with Sam Harris. Like a lot of people, I think, once YouTube started getting big, Sam came up on my radar. As a born again atheist, I was quite bitter towards the Christian church, and so yeah, quite a big fan of Dawkins and Sam Harris, and he has the intellect to speak in paragraphs, so there's loads of great videos of like him smacking down stupid priest, and you're like, yeah, 17-year-old me love that shit.
Yeah. I mean, Sam Harris, yeah, clearly, like, he's clearly a smart guy. He just is, clearly. He's not stupid. I don't think anyone really in their right mind. I think some people get a little bit too caught up in saying that, oh, so and so is stupid or whatever because you disagree with them, or maybe even if you do think someone is horrendous or whatever, or they say stupid things. Sam Harris, I don't think anyone could sensibly say is stupid. I think when some people do say that, I think it's delusional. I definitely think, similar to you, I used to like that kind of, well, I mean, it was huge at the time, 2007 or whatever, it was all that kind of atheist stuff. And I still think some of that is quite funny. I haven't watched it in years. Sam Harris has disappointed me, let's say, in the last 7-8 years, that kind of time period.
So Mal, have you encountered Sam much?
I haven't. No, this is like a ground level introduction to this guy.
Good excuse for an intro then for those that are with you there. So he's a neuroscientist, a few degrees from a few of the top universities, clearly a very smart man, and then started doing the TED Talk speaking circuit, right? And it's just confident New York, acerbic Jew enough to kind of be quite comfortable shooting someone down to their face and telling them everything they just said is wrong and stupid. And as I say, it just has this ability to speak in quite succinct paragraphs, like get to the heart of a matter. It's witty, charming, funny, but brings up pertinent data. Like it's a whirlwind to watch. He really is like, one of these people that just give him a mic and he can wow an audience on most topics. I think one of his best talk is how AI is probably going to kill us, and
but also, like, he's not charismatic in a extroverted kind of way. He's I wouldn't call him, well, yeah, maybe deadpan. He's almost robotic, but there is a kind of charisma in there. It's kind of a subtle thing. I mean, he has a podcast as well. He's written a few books. I think his first book got big was back in mid 2000s. It was like it was the OG of these kind of like anti-God.
What did it used to be called? Waking Up? I think he changed the name because then he had a meditation app.
Yes, so I've just opened it on YouTube to see how many subscribers he has on YouTube, and it used to be called Waking Up, and I think it's now called Making Sense by the.
Yeah.
So he's on like 600, or a little bit less than 600,000 subscribers.
Yeah, and he would have this thing where he'd, again, claim himself as left wing, New York, but then occasionally something would come up in the news, and he's like, "Well, here's where I part ways," and I would often agree with him. As someone that's not like I'm looking to join a group and always agree and conform with their opinions. He sometimes would have brilliant takes on da da da. I think even when who's the used to be the power behind Trump?
Steve Bannon.
Yes, so Steve Bannon got cancelled from speaking at an event, and Sam Harris spoke up vehemently, gave this great speech about how everything that's wrong with Steve Bannon as a person and his politics, and everything that's wrong with Trump and his politics, but saying but Steve Bannon is undoubtedly a very powerful, important person right now. So if you're going to not want to hear what he says because you don't want to platform him, it's a liberal event in New York. He's not going to convert anyone, right? But it is interesting to hear what he said. And so, like a lot of the old guard, fight for free speech, and there are edge cases where the left goes too far or some kids protest the wrong thing. He always seemed reasonable, but there's just a few cases. And for those that haven't seen, T1J, wonderful YouTuber, just does a great breakdown of why he stopped idolizing Sam Harris and goes through, articles he wrote where he thought racial profiling is okay because it's not going to be a white person bombing a plane, and so we should Muslims should expect to wait longer in a queue at the airport, sort of thing, and then got really offended when there was an outcry to that. It's but you knew what you were doing, right? You knew you were kicking a hornet's nest.
I think for me, because as I said before, I watched all those videos. I don't think I read his first book, whatever it was, the Anti-God book, and I didn't read that. And I think around 2010 or 2011, he released a book on I think it was called The Moral Landscape. It was like a book on moral philosophy, and it had this big theory of moral philosophy, and it just fell flat. It was no way. It just wasn't as good as it should have been for someone with his education. It was obviously just not very good. I did remember buying that and reading it, and even as an English undergraduate, do you know what I mean? Studying English rather than philosophy, I was reading it this is what is this? This is just not well argued. There's some interesting points, I guess, but it was just strange. He kind of went off my radar for a while, and then I started listening to his podcast. And again, it was always oh yeah, no, I agree with that. That's a nuanced take. And for me, it always comes back to his problem is fundamentally with Islam. That's his overarching thing. He just can't get over
he
it.
Couldn't get past 7-Eleven, could he? Really, he never recovered from. And it's sort of in the same way that Hitchens sort of went off the rails with Iraq. It was just the one cause that he never truly recovered from. And there's just some terrible takes, and it sort of led him, as it often does, because he made enemies. He started making friends with some strange people, many of whom are on this list. And then he ends up, is it Charles Murray and the Bell Curve? Are you gentlemen familiar with that book? Okay, so Charles Murray is some old kook who, no one in social sciences respects IQ as a measure. And in 1980 something, maybe even 70, wrote this book about how maybe all the problems in America are just because black people are dumber. Have we considered that? And all this data that if you avoid thinking about it really hard, you're okay, I guess that's just what the science says. But if you talk to any scientist, they're this is all wrong for 400 reasons, especially in the 70s, looking at the disparity between white and black America and being I guess it's just because they're dumber, is an incredible conclusion to come to. And Sam Harris just made this guy a cause celebre, invited him on his podcast and said, why are the scientific community so racist to you because you're a poor white man? It's so sad, so sad.
Well, because I remember listening to his podcast for a while, and that was... I kind of stopped being interested in it bit by bit, and I kind of started listening again. And that was a moment where I was just I will not listen to this anymore. But it was very strange because Sam Harris was saying that he was trying to make a very specific point
Yeah, he's like, oh, I might not agree with everything that this gentleman says,
he
but
was like,
it's
well,
horrible how he's been ostracized.
Yeah, and he even said like, look, I don't know why anyone would. He kept saying this. I don't know why anyone would be even interested in looking at the science of IQ. I don't think it's interesting. I don't think I agree with him.
Yeah, as a neuroscientist, he must know it's bullshit, right? It's a terrible measure of nothing.
He kept coming back to saying like the point of me having him on was that I don't agree with this. I guess I don't think it was like as much the language back then, but it was
cancel culture. Yeah,
thing. He didn't agree with that, and I was like, this is such a weird way to try to make this point that I don't know why someone who has any intellect whatsoever couldn't just make that point any other way, but he had to bring on Douglas Murray, who. I mean, the less said about him, the better in a way. But like he's just not well respected. The book is nonsense, but it's been used as like the most popular kind of source of fodder.
And just to be clear, like the timing was really off as well, right? This was during the rise of Black Lives Matter, right? This was used as the scientific counter narrative to Black Lives Matter. Is that, oh, the reason black people are getting killed is it's their culture. Maybe it's that boom bop hip hop music, like. Okay, like that's a theory. Yeah. Like should have died in the 70s, but it's a theory.
But what was I saying? Back to the Islam thing, because he like I'm very boring in terms of being anti-religion. I think we've established that anti-religion, and I'm totally down for people saying that religions are all bad in different ways or to maybe different extents. I don't know, like I don't know every religion in the world, but I could believe that Buddhism isn't as bad as, or isn't bad in the same way as Christianity, because every religion has.
We could put them on a tier list. That'd be a fun episode.
We could, but Sam Harris is somewhere down the line. Maybe it's always been there, and I just didn't notice it. Obsessed with the idea that Islam is infinitely more dangerous than
the worst
anything
religion,
else, which I think is out of sync with the reality of Christianity, which I think is I don't even know how you quantify these things. So I'm certainly not saying one's worse, but he's just obsessed with this idea that Islam over anything else is definitely by far an existential threat in a way that nothing else ever has been, and I find that a little bit bonkers.
So yeah, I think Sam Harris. Sorry, go for it, man.
No, I was just going to say it is a little bit more than bonkers if you kind of just completely exclude everything else and essentially put all of your focused eggs on that particular basket. Yeah, there's definitely something deep rooted there.
I mean, the way he said it, which I think just succinctly puts his whole position, is that everyone hates Dick Cheney, but if Dick Cheney ruled the world, right, the world would be covered in McDonald's. Whereas if Islam ruled the world, Israel would be nuked to glass, and therefore we should let Dick Cheney rule the world. And I was like, again, like it feels. For someone that spends so hard when he's in his lane and his subject matter, talking about neuroscience, very careful and precise to just be like, on balance, let Dick Cheney have the wheel and do what he wants with the Middle East. Because some people in Islam aren't nice. I'm like, oh,
yeah. And you just reminded me of something else he said, because he had like a spat with Noam Chomsky, and he published all these emails of them arguing, which I think both of them actually come across as quite immature and petulant. But Sam Harris, the one who leaked the emails, came across as, in my opinion, far worse.
Made the first dick move. Yeah.
He said after that he was comparing Noam Chomsky to Ben Carson, the Republican politician who is a maniac, politically speaking. He said that Noam Chomsky doesn't understand like how bad Islam is, and on that point alone, Ben Carson would therefore make a better president than Noam Chomsky. And I was just like, oh, you lost me a few years ago, mate, but you've really lost me now, because that is insane. I could not believe that whatsoever.
I mean, it's no longer a comparison we have to make. Ben Carson died of COVID after famously coming out as being an anti-vaxxer, despite being a neurosurgeon. Strange figure.
Yeah, very strange figure. But Sam Harris is, I mean, to bring it back to like our rating system, I don't believe he's a grifter. I don't think he. Yeah. Maybe.
No, I think he has convictions. Yeah. Like, as someone that saw 9/11 firsthand, like I think there's a conviction there, I mean, obviously, there's some desire to get out there as a public speaker, and there's some topics he probably shouldn't be running his mouth on, but that's the
and I
game.
think
So there's
what you
some
said before,
grift
like
there.
what you said before, like who he's friends with, that's where for me it becomes questionable. Like maybe there's a grifty element, so maybe a 1.5 or so. I don't know. I don't feel like I could give him very high
Yeah,
on that though.
Intellect, I think he's the highest on this list, at least. Like,
Yeah, I think because we're grading on a curve, so you have to give him a 5 because he's the highest. He's the highest on the list. So I
as far as right-wing YouTubers go,
yeah.
this is an interesting one.
Mm.
He was definitely one of. I mean, there were so many apologists for the Iraq War and the war on terror. It's hard to put too much power
Yeah,
in his
I don't know
hands.
what I would rate this. I feel
He
don't know
has
what
again
material.
pushed hard against Black Lives Matter and the idea of reforming the police in any way. He's always jumping to defend. It's anytime a police kills an unarmed black man, that's the main topic of his podcast these days. I don't know. I've
Right.
stopped listening to it for years because it was just episode after episode of that.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's hard to tell, like, because with Tim Pool, I feel I have a better gauge of who's listening to Tim Pool and what they're listening to him for and what they use it for. To Sam Harris, like, I don't know whether he gets a lot of people who genuinely do just listen to like a broad range of media, and are they fully convinced by everything they say? Do they listen critically? Tim Pool listeners, I don't think listen very critically at all, except for like the odd left-wing YouTube video essayist who wants to make something taking him down. Whereas somehow it's
So just
harder for
like
me to
a lot of
quantify, but
people listen to Tim Pool to feel like they're a centrist. A lot of people listen to Sam Harris to feel like they're an intellectual, right? Like,
potentially, yeah, that's
I
probably
think
is the case. Probably is the case.
he's on the conveyor belt, but I imagine his power is dwindling. So I'm prepared to give him a 2.
From an outsider's perspective, just taking in everything you guys have said and just having a very, very quick sort of brush over some of the stuff that he's covered in the past. My curiosity in this particular category is, so he's taking what is quite clearly a very sort of anti-Islam state, in the sense that there are people that are probably going to be going to that content because they share that same principle and viewpoint. That's one thing. That's really not converting anything in towards being more of a menace to society. What I find kind of interesting is people that are maybe finding him through his work on neuroscience, AI, what have you, and then kind of pivoting based on consuming those videos into that. What is the possible conversion rate for them kind of being like, well, they totally am in alignment with him on this, this, and this. He's maybe got a point about that thing that I wasn't thinking about. And to me, that seems, again, from an outsider's perspective, the thing that could make him perhaps more of a menace to society than he maybe is now.
Yeah, nail on the head. I think he's top of the marketing funnel, right? Like, no one watches a Sam Harris video and gets radicalized, but then the YouTube algorithm will then start suggesting Tim Pool videos to you, or Jordan Peterson videos to you, right?
And again,
I think he's
it
the
does tie
foot
back
in
to,
the
like,
door for the alt-right movement.
Gateway drug.
It does tie back to like who he's friends with, because he's been, I don't know whether he still is, like disconcertingly pally with like Ben Shapiro in particular, and it's just if you're somewhat respectable like Sam Harris, I think once was, talking to someone like Ben Shapiro who is not in any way semi-respectable does lend like some kind of, I don't know, legitimacy to him. Whether he's still friends with him, I couldn't say, but I have a feeling they're still run somewhat in the same circles. So, it's not like guilt by association, but I think sometimes that is appropriate to question like what is going on there. I find it a bit odd.
Like Tony Blair did for George Bush, right, to legitimize the war in Iraq. Sam Harris does with a lot of these characters. Sam Harris is a legitimizer. In fact, funny story, he was one of the earlier big thinkers to go on Joe Rogan's podcast, and kind of clean Joe Rogan up. Like, he said, like, yes, I will go on your podcast, but I don't want you talking about your fleshlight sponsors. He just gave a list of like, you're going to have to tidy up this and do less of this and then do a bit more. And after Joe Rogan had done that, he actually started getting more and more serious guests on his podcast. So Sam Harris does legitimize a lot of these clowns.
Right.
All right,
Yeah.
but we'll move on. But how entertaining is he?
I think this is an interesting one. So when I did listen to his podcast a bit more, my girlfriend occasionally heard me listen to it. She's like, "This is the most boring thing I've ever heard in my entire life." just from his voice alone, because he as I said before, he's charismatic in an odd way. Like, if you're not
It's a great podcast to go to sleep to. It really is.
Yeah. And like he's not he's not like a natural entertainer in the way that I said like I think Vosh, who's obviously left wing, is. I think Sam Harris is not that, but he's kind of like I don't know. If you pay attention, like he's got charisma. He can be quite like acerbic, as you said before, Chris. He's got a wit to him, so.
He's got a good, like, if you look at his knockout highlight reel, right? He's got some good takedowns, but he does speak 4 times a day for 30 years. So, yeah, his highlight reel's good, but he talks a lot.
Yeah.
He's kind of middling then. Are we about to put Sam Harris in C tier? Is that unfair?
Oh, it's very hard to tell. Tim Pool, I think I am more acquainted of where he is now. Sam Harris, I don't know, like. Is his son setting
what he's doing these days?
Yeah, so I'm tempted to put him
is for
similar.
me,
You could put him below because Tim Pool's huge. Tim Pool is huge, so he probably should be above Sam Harris.
Yeah, if I'd done this 3 years ago, I think Sam would be up in A. But now he just seems like his star is fading.
Yeah, true.
Probably for the best. All right, let's do a fun one. Alex Jones, Mal, over to you. Tell us about Alex. I haven't watched much of him. I've just seen the Gay Frogs song.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, right, so that ties into it. Getting ahead of ourselves, that's definitely in the entertainment category. I don't even know how to describe this man other than like a conspiracy theorist with the poison grace of like a cocaine field wrestler from the 80s. He is like the ultimate warrior of right-wing bullshit. And, to kind of dive right into it, pulling no punches, his grift is strong. Like, this is somebody that I genuinely feel is a character. No, not even that, a caricature at this point, who really kind of has thrown himself into it. It's weird. I was looking at his website yesterday and the online store, because apparently that has been like a major source of income for him over the years. And just the amount of tie-in merchandise. Well,
especially since he got demonetized.
Yeah, but the amount of like tie-in merchandise to like his topics, like it's all very patriot-centric. And what I find kind of interesting, and this is again another sidebar tangent, is that very much taking an anti-vax stance, anti-max stance, COVID-19 is a hoax. But yet one of the best-selling items under his apparel section is a face mask with the InfoWars logo on it. And it is also, if you look in the section of nuclear and biological protection, that's the only thing in there. So I just thought that was an interesting side note.
Yeah, no, his merchandising is like, it's like world famous, isn't it? It's just like, he sells so much crap. It's just
it is. That's
just like.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Sorry, he sells like tons of. Does he even sell like colloidal silver? But it's just like vitamins and all this. It's just any health crap as far as I know.
He was big into that. I think Faraday cages for your phone to stop the 5G radiation from hurting you. All that fun stuff.
Yeah, all sorts of interesting shit.
So my favorite Alex Jones story, and it's sort of at his peak of his powers and fame. I first heard of him actually through my Canadian friend's mother, who was deeply Christian, and this was sort of the people, the algorithm were feeding them, because he presented himself at one point as Christian values Alex Jones, God-fearing Texan. But apparently him and someone else tried to get into one of these elite Illuminati paedophile
Is this the Bohemian
Satanist
Grove
cults.
thing?
Yeah, it is,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And then according to the other person involved in the story, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm only half remembering this, but Alex Jones was too scared to go any further, so just sort of hid in the forest peeking. And the other person actually went in and found it quite easy to infiltrate the group and just say hi, and it was a fairly boring party, according to that person's account. But Alex has another version of the lizard people and the orgy he saw.
Yeah, so that stems
Is
from,
that about right?
Yeah, that stems from John Ronson. He wrote he's wrote many books, but I think it's Extremists is the name of it, and it's about basically, as the title suggests, people with extreme beliefs and values. But there's this brilliant anecdote in it in which it describes what you're talking about, where they try and infiltrate Bohemian Grove and the secret owl meeting of Bilderberg Group. And basically Alex Jones is just like quivering in the bushes, but yet he's kind of, his recollection of it is that he's storming the front line to break down this Satanist cabal and get the inside scoop of what the deep state's really doing behind our backs. It's brilliant, and it is very much in essence Alex Jones. It's all like bluster on the surface, but when you cut into the inside of it, it's just like, no, you were just back there pissing yourself, Alex.
I've seen. I think it was. I'm sure it was Tim Pool was on. Yeah, it was Tim Pool. Tim Pool was on Alex Jones once. It wasn't even that long ago. And
God.
Tim Pool is talking, and Alex Jones is clearly not impressed with his kind of, I guess, kind of theatrical skills in a way, because that's all it is with Alex Jones. He's not clearly
sophistry.
The way he's kind of. Yeah, he's not happy with it. So you can just see him staring daggers at him and just quickly moving it along, because Tim Pool, and this comes back down to that entertainment factor. Tim Pool has no entertainment factor. Alex Jones should really have been, I don't know,
is
like
all entertainment factor.
Yeah.
It should have been. I think WWF wrestler hit the nails on the head. He would be amazing.
Yeah. That is
right?
True. Yeah.
Imagine him declaring his enemies, "You're part of the Illuminati." I'll take you down. Would be
Okay, I mean that would genuinely be brilliant. I mean, I've not been into wrestling ever since I was a 10-year-old and I found out it was all fake, but I think that would pull me back in.
If Alex Jones suddenly switched career paths.
Yeah.
That's why Alex Jones became a conspiracy theorist. When he found out wrestling was fake, it just broke him. He never recovered from the psychic
If this
damage.
is fake, what else is? And then the rabbit hole begins.
He's had a few, like, two main kind of I guess court cases recently, one of which was his divorce, and I think that basically, unsurprisingly, it came out that he was essentially just like a narcissistic abuser. I can't remember all the details of it, but I remember hearing about it a few years ago. And the other one was the parents of the Sandy Hook.
Yes. So that was him fully jumping the shark. He started with Pizzagate, and then because he's so pro-gun, declared that the Sandy Hook children were crisis actors, I think he called them, and yeah.
One of them,
the same with some September 9/11 was a hoax, right? These are all fake people. Look at this weird spreadsheet I have that says these people never existed.
Just a real weird side tangent, and I found this out doing the research. So the guy that he called the crisis act is called David Hogg, I believe, from the Parkland, Florida shooting. And in that reporting of that story, he also put out news articles on InfoWars website stating that, where's his name? Marcel Fontaine. He kind of pegged him as the shooter at the time. Turned out it wasn't. And then one of the lawsuits that kind of followed in the aftermath was Marcel Fontaine basically suing him because, as you would if you've been called the mass shooter of this awful tragedy. Just less than a month ago, whilst the lawsuit was still active, Marcel Fontaine died in a house fire. Now, that's a conspiracy theory Alex Jones isn't going to be talking about. Just create a multiverse of conspiracies.
Wow, the best response to a conspiracy theorist is to be more conspiracy theory than them, right? It's my favorite meme. If someone says the moon landing was a hoax, you go, "Oh, you still believe in the moon, bro?" Interesting.
I have played this game actually with someone in my family a long time ago, Everything was a conspiracy theory, but the 9/11 thing was a big part of it. This person in my family was also deeply anti-Semitic. I mean, it all ties in, right? But they were saying something once, and I think I just started just making something up, and I was like, "Did you hear about this? I think it was an earthquake in China just last week." And he goes, "Oh no, I didn't hear about it." "Oh no, you wouldn't. None of the media are reporting on it." And he's just suddenly, I don't think he realized for a good while like I was playing his game. Um, that was when I realized if you play this game with them, people do not take kindly to it because I don't know whether they feel like the earth shift under their feet slightly, and it's just like, well, this is an easy game to play. Am I being played? It didn't go down well, but it was quite funny while it lasted.
I mean, you've probably heard it most with QAnon, like the term LARPing, where like those nerds that take games too seriously and start dressing up and cosplaying and role playing as a character, and it very much feels like this. It's like someone that, if you ever had a murder mystery dinner sort of game, it's the people that are forever playing that, but in real life, and just sort of tweaks. I think the great news about Alex Jones getting sued to oblivion is that for a long time YouTube was overtaking mainstream media, and it's because it's amazing how much content you can pump out when you don't have to research or fact check fucking anything. Right? Like, and as easy as to be critical of the mainstream media, it's like, no, there's a reason why if you're going to report on, our sources say, like, what sources? I want to check your receipts, right? And as entertaining as it was to say, well, what if this is all a lie? And that's, wow, an amazing rabbit hole to go down for entertainment. You pissed off real people in America. Real people have feelings and lawyers. And as far as I can tell, is he obliterated? Is he over? Is he bankrupt?
He has filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy for, I think, at least 2, maybe all 3 of his companies that he owns: InfoWars, Prison Planet, and I think the other is IW Health, which is where he sells all his supplements and stuff. He's claimed Chapter 11, but I think that is primarily just a defensive thing to try and sort of stop any pending sort of lawsuits against his companies and to sort of preserve his own personal finance.
I mean, at this point, it's just an accounting move, right? Like,
yeah.
I can't remember what I was going to say. Oh yeah, back to the conspiracy thing. I feel like the problem with it is when you see just the kind of like average Joe who gets wrapped up in these conspiracy theories, the real harm of them isn't just the people who are like victims of that, like the parents of a mass shooting or something, but it's also the people who believe these conspiracy theories. Are not always, but often these very vulnerable people in society who clearly have these major issues, who are being preyed upon by people like Alex Jones. He is the archetype of it, right? And that's kind of like the main source of his grift, because the things he's selling are quite often to do with it's all tied into this prepping kind of culture, isn't it? It's like, well, Tim Pool does this a bit as well, like, there's going to be a civil war in the United States and stuff like that. Alex Jones is very good, and if I do sometimes feel sorry for the people who believe these nonsense conspiracy theories, it's just because they are being exploited to such a degree by these ridiculous people. To be able to be exploited by these people is a big sign of some kind of deficit in your life ultimately. So yeah.
I mean, we've talked about conspiracy theories a few times, and there's this understandable desire to feel like the world is wrong. And search for a higher truth. Like, I completely empathize with that. It's just really sad when someone arrives at one of these dead ends and is like, and you're like, there's a powerful group of people, rich people pulling the strings and running the world. You're like, yes, and they're Jewish lizards. You're like, no, you were so close. They're called capitalists. No.
I think. It's very frustrating. It is. I think the problem is that anyone who has, well, in my opinion, obviously as well, I think, but anyone who has like a more nuanced, deeper understanding of these things doesn't ascribe that kind of general belief onto specific people necessarily, because that's not really the important thing. It's again more to do with like economic structures or things like that. And I think once you see, and maybe this is where Tim Pool is also successful, like you can adopt some of that language and kind of use that anti-establishment rhetoric and use it to your own grifty end while sounding in a way similar to certain types of leftist, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's very thorny issue, isn't it? Really.
Let's get to the scores, gentlemen. So I think entertainment, Alex Jones is the G, right? Like wrestling at his finest. Even people that hate him have found themselves watching his highlight reel and laughing. He's the most entertaining on this list, I think.
Absolutely.
I want to not give him a 1 for intellect, but I feel like the other categories are bleeding. Like, has he ever said anything smart? He's smarter than Tim Paul, but that's a low bench to clear.
I think he has a base intellect. I think you kind of have to have some base intellect to know these are the trigger topics. These are the things that are going to bring people in. If you look at his website, it is all just hot button issues that are just going to get people riled. So it's like keeping up with current affairs, changes and whatnot, and kind of twisting and manipulating to kind of get the appropriate response. So I do think there is.
Aren't you really describing Grift though? Like...
Yeah, but I think to kind of pull off a successful grift, to pull off a successful con, you kind of have to have a certain amount of.
That's what I say about categories bleeding, though, right? Like,
yeah,
I think his grift score is so high.
I think this is different. I think he does have an. He's not super intelligent, obviously, but he is certainly more intelligent than Tim Pool. And I think the difference between him and Tim Pool is that
aren't we all?
He is. It's kind of a given. But Alex Jones, he's kind of, whether it's like a raw intellect or whatever, he's the innovator in this field, right? You have to give him some intellect points for that because he's the originator of this entire thing. He's kind of like a jazz musician in the way that he does it. You watch him, he just riffs off it. It's like this amazing improv, it's obviously just grift all the way down. It's completely insane. But you do need to have a brain that is at least exercised, whether it's inherently like the best.
Yeah, no, he's got a wit and a half. Like honestly, and it's incredibly entertaining. And so I think final thing before we score him, how damaging is he? I think there was a gunman that showed up at the pizza parlor because of Pizzagate, right?
Yeah.
He's probably part of the Capitol Hill riots, if not directly, then the conveyor belt to that madness for a lot of people, right?
I think Alex Jones, I don't know what kind of position he's in now, but we have to at least take into some of the historical menacing that he's done into account, because I kind of feel like he is an S tier in a way. He's maybe on his way out. I don't know, like maybe you could drop him down to an A, but he's pretty high.
Yeah, but because, as you say, because he's an originator, right? Like I want to score him so high on grift, so high on entertainment, medium on Menace Society, and
he's a menace.
Who on this? Does anyone disagree with S tier? If Alex Jones is an S tier alt-right YouTuber, who is? That's my challenge to you.
So I know we're not covering him today, but Joe Rogan could be, again, partly down to his reach. Ben Shapiro could be. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, but Alex Jones beats both of them on entertainment, right? I think he's earned his place. As you say, his star is dwindling, but good. Like that's because the powers that be have taken notice, and I hope it just puts an end to this sort of sloppy, libelous journalism.
Yeah.
Like we're all paying the price for free media. But Alex Jones, I'll put it this way: in 10 years' time, I don't think people will still be talking about Tim Paul, but they will still be talking about Alex Jones.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, actually. Yeah.
Hopefully not in current context. Hopefully it's more of a historical thing.
Yeah, geez,
can you imagine?
I hope he gets into wrestling. Alex, if you're listening, like I think you have a wonderful career in professional wrestling.
That's if his heart manages to sustain, because like when he does get on one, it's like 0 to 60 in half a second. It's like that man's blood pressure. His doctor must be concerned at all times.
His doctor must be amazing.
Yeah. He's constantly refreshing his newsfeed and thinking, "Oh shit, could be today. Could be today." He just drops.
I don't think we'll have time to get through all of the rest on the list, but shall we have a bit of light relief? Dave Rubin next.
Oh yes, please.
So
I'm
I have a special place in my heart for Dave Rubin because he de-radicalized me, right? So about 10 years ago, where I considered myself a centrist and was listening to Sam Harris about the excesses of the left, and I would say I would have described myself, like a lot of Tim Pool fans, as I am left, but I'm concerned with the noises the left are making, and I wish the left won more elections. And the reason they don't is because here's an example of them being unreasonable, and here's an example of them being unreasonable, right? And Dave Rubin was the man that pulled me back from the brink, just with the shining light of his pure white hot stupidity. Once I'd seen Dave Rubin, a man that claims to be a comedian and leftist and an intellectual, and yet has never ever made anyone laugh or said an intelligent thing or believed anything on the left whatsoever. Yeah. This man, you can still see the receipts paid for by the Koch brothers. Like he is incredible. Give it up for our man Dave Rubin. Just slow clap.
Yeah, have you seen his stand-up comedy?
Sadly, I have. Yeah,
Yeah, it's actually genuinely really, really, really bad. I didn't believe.
There's not a
I've seen
single
stand-up
laugh.
comedy in my time. Yeah, but yeah, I'm sure I saw the one I saw. I think I've seen a couple, but one of them that I saw, he just kind of goes up and because he's gay, but he just kind of goes up and makes like gay jokes, but it's just very much just they're not even really jokes. I would hesitate to call them jokes because I couldn't really detect where the jokes were, and I think the audience clearly didn't know where they were either because the only clue you had that I think he kind of got to the end of it and he was like, "Oh, tough audience," that kind of thing, and everyone was just like, "What?" It was so strange.
Yeah. No, anyone that's getting radicalized to the right, just recommend wholeheartedly Dave Rubin's channel. It really is the methadone to get someone off of a right wing YouTube addiction. It's incredible.
So I was going to say
Watching Donald Trump lose the last election in slow motion is just therapy for all of the years Donald Trump was in office. Just watching him lose his mind and go from Donald Trump will win to Donald Trump is winning to, well, I guess this election must be fake is beautiful.
So Tim Pool has 1.3 million subscribers. Sam Harris has just below 600,000 subscribers on YouTube. How many do you think Rubin has?
I mean, I remember him being big 10 years ago, but numbers 10 years ago are never impressive today, right? Has he got a couple of million? Because he was paid and bought for by the Cato Institute and the Koch brothers. I know that.
Yeah. So he has 1.7 million subscribers. But this is the interesting thing. He gets around a fifth of the views per video that Tim Pool gets.
So it's paid for, right? Yeah. It's not organic. Tim
Well,
Pool is organic. This is paid and bought for. What's it called when they do fake grassroots astroturfing?
Yeah, or potentially just kind of like legacy subscribers who just haven't been kind of washed out yet. So that's actually quite unbelievable that he could be getting, below 100,000 views from the vast majority of these videos looking back, which is for 1.7 million subscribers, that's not a good conversion rate whatsoever.
I think my most popular videos have more views than some of Dave Rubin's least popular. That's good, isn't it? Yeah. There's hope for society.
Yeah, but he so I'm kind of getting onto the criteria here. On the entertainment factor, I think he's utterly uncharismatic, but the entertainment factor is still there. But and the best kind of way to exemplify this
is this laughing at someone rather than laughing with them.
but he's very, very good at this. I don't know if they exist anymore. They might have been taken down, but there used to be tons of channels based on just clipping. It's just like Dave Rubin clips. Completely without commentary. Like the channel didn't make it clear that they were anti Dave Rubin. They would just clip something with the full context of maybe 5 minutes of him talking, and it was just, you don't need any commentary or any explanation whatsoever. Just the stupidest stuff you've ever heard of. I mean, this is a guy who was intellectually eviscerated by Rogan by Joe Rogan, which is just one of the most amazing things to see because Joe Rogan is not a smart man at all. Dave Rubin is remarkable.
So the amazing thing is that part of the Koch brothers, and for those that don't know, the Koch brother, I think one of them died now. May he rest in hell. Big oil magnates, right? And yeah, like most of the stories you've read about snowflakes, cancel culture, students being terrible, the left running society are initiatives by them. And if you really look at the narrative, like they'll push all this stuff, which is culture war bullshit. And then the real thing is, and then these environmentalists want to stop our job creators from drilling in the Arctic. That's what pays the bills. The real message is fuck any environmental legislation that stops big oil from doing what big oil wants to do, and the rest is just noise to bring an audience in. Yeah, like Dave Rubin, my God, is just really where they started to show their hand. When they declared themselves, do you remember this term, the intellectual dark web?
Yes, that was horrifically cringy. That was quite painful.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people on this list that got labeled as the intellectual dark web and pushed it. I mean, one of the gentlemen I need a deep dive on another time. But yeah, again, like it's almost credible until Dave Rubin's in the pack and you're like, sorry, Dave Rubin, intellectual. On what grounds?
Yeah. There's a hilarious one of the clips I remember seeing is he's saying that Bolsonaro in Brazil, he's like, he went off about how he's great, he's brilliant. He's like, well, he's anti-Marxist, so that's all I care about. He's anti-Marxist, pro-capitalist, that's all I care about. But he called him Bolsonaro like the entire time, Bolsonaro. And it's just, this guy cannot even read. That's not even just like pronouncing it with an American accent. That's just getting.
Yeah, he's got all the lights. He's got the teleprompter. He's got all the professional cameras. And he can't read the teleprompter.
Brilliant. But again, he's another who can kind of, you said this before, he used to call himself the last liberal. He used to work for the Young Turks. And that's kind of where he got
I was a liberal, and then I've seen the error of my ways and the problems with the left. And
it's not even that, it's just the left. I think the left has gone crazy and I haven't moved is his thing, isn't it?
And also because he's gay, like he's often flagged as like, and it's funny because a lot of these far right people flag him as, for example, I'm friends with Dave Rubin, as their like human shield for their offensive views. But then when he got married and had a child, they all had to come out and be like, oh, but actually I'm against that. Fuck you, Dave.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are videos of him like talking. There are videos of him talking to Ben Shapiro. And he's kind of putting on a brave face. He says, I totally respect, Ben, you get to believe what you believe. You're an orthodox.
I was thinking of Ben Shapiro's voice right now.
Yeah, and Ben Shapiro is just like, well, I think what you're doing is sinful. I would never go to your wedding. Obviously, I think it's sinful, disgusting, and all this. And Dave Rubin is just like internally crying, but he's just like, I respect your difference of opinion. And I mean, that's what we're like on the right. We can respect each other.
Yeah, really, is it respect? I mean, it just goes without saying, obviously, to the present company, but yeah, Ben Shapiro turning around to Dave and being like, have you considered not being gay? It's like Hamas turning around to Israel and being like, have you just considered not existing?
Yeah. But Dave, yeah.
Right.
Okay, onto these.
The grift is strong, and I have respect for Dave because I know he got paid. We've seen the receipts, especially because he used to work for the Young Turks, and then spends his career going on about how he left the left. He pissed off, unfortunately, a lot of credible actual journalists, who just went through and worked out he was getting paid by the Cato Institute and had been before he joined the Young Turks, and this was their plan all along, and they do this now. They're like, we're going to pay you to pretend to be leftist for a year.
Yeah.
I've heard a few people say this, like that yes, they often offer, not only do they offer big money for any story that talks about how the left are snowflakes and cancel culture, you get paid $20,000 for any of those stories, which is why you hear them so often and why the press is so eager to publish them, because they're sponsored stories. But yeah, he is a very obvious example of this. So the grift is
He is.
strong. The intellect is
You're
so weak. He's -4. Like, it's the dumbest person I've ever encountered on the internet. I think there are makeup tutorialists who are smarter than Dave Rubin. It's incredible.
I mean, yeah, this makeup tutorialist. I mean,
no, I apologize for that comparison, but he just presents himself as this intellectual discussing political opinions with weight, and it's like,
what's the classic quote? He went to an event, and I think Jordan Peterson was there, or a bunch of other people. I've seen people quote this a million times since. He said, "My brain is still in recovery mode from all the high-level ideas." Who are you kidding? And what are you talking about? I mean, like, I remember doing like exams.
His brain retired, bro.
Yeah, I've never needed like recovery mode from high-level ideas. What are you is the strangest thing.
I so consistently smart.
He just heard about libertarianism once, and it blew his mind, bro. And then someone said, "But what about the roads?" And he was like, could not untangle that pretzel. I actually, again, would like to give him negative points. I think Dave Rubin de-radicalizes people. I think he's like the film Four Lions.
I don't think... Yes, yeah. I don't think Dave Rubin is harmful whatsoever. I'm trying to get like a general sense of like what people think of it. I've gone on the subreddit. It's pretty quiet. It's pretty dead.
He's just paid to have an audience, and it's just died. No, Dave Rubin is my hero, honestly. Like, and it's my recommendation to anyone you know who's being radicalized. just an hour of Dave Rubin, and they'll struggle to keep a straight face. Entertaining. I'm laughing talking about him, but again, I think we're laughing at him, not with him.
I think maybe a 2.5 or something like that, because Dave Rubin clips are phenomenal. They truly are. Oh yeah, but he's
I think we're agreed he's DT. Thanks for de-radicalizing me, Dave. But don't try harder. Keep on shining, you crazy diamond. Are you gents up for ending on Milo Yiannopolis? Or would that end the thing with the sour taste?
I can do that. I kind of find him a bit less interesting, but I'm happy to go with anything, really.
I mean,
I am again unfamiliar with this person, so I have no dog in the fight here. I'm just here for the learnings.
Gives me the excuse to explain him then. So
okay,
Milo Yiannopolis really is 4chan personified. For those not familiar with Gamergate, he was one of the significant figures that came up during it. So Gamergate was weird because it was just a mixture of strange people leaking out of these toxic forums. It was people that hated that girls were playing games, that people that own businesses pander to liberal ideals for capitalists. And, but Milo Yiannopolis, like Dave Rubin, just loved being the token gay man in far-right channels. His success was quite meteoric for those that hadn't heard of him, but yeah, he's an author, a provocateur. What was his tour called? Dangerous Faggot. So that was the game he was playing, right? Like, he called Donald Trump daddy. He said really racist things, but then said I couldn't be racist because I only sleep with black men. Like it was a weird game he was playing, and I mean, and to some extent, he was right that he did use the gay label as a shield from a lot of criticism. He'd found a loophole in the system, and just before Trump even, or kind of at the same time, realized that if you never apologize, they could never stop you.
That's true. Yeah, yeah. He had for a while he felt completely invincible. He was pretty much completely invincible until he kind of committed harikiri essentially. I can't remember the exact details of it, but didn't he basically say that like um, being taken advantage of by older men can be really good for you essentially? I mean, it was kind of like a justification of
He
pedophilia
was
sometimes was the
always,
basic argument.
yeah. I mean, he was always treading on a tightrope, right? Like his whole shtick was, I'm going to say the most offensive thing possible and not apologize for it. And yeah, sure enough, something came up where he'd been abused when he was younger and was
Right.
making light of it. And he'd made enough enemies. I mean, I literally remember at the time, the company I was working for, you could tell Google defund the following websites, right? Like blacklist websites so that your advertising dollars wouldn't go towards them. And the rise of Milo Yiannopolis was a time where a few companies I knew stopped blacklisted Breitbart, and they were publishing terrible, like weirdly bizarre pro-Israel but anti-Semitic articles in the same week. Just really odd stuff. And yeah, like he made light of child abuse. And I mean, it's odd though, because since then, a few people in the Republican Party have been caught molesting children, and because they remembered the cardinal rule of never apologize, have somehow got away with it. Gates, right? Who's the
Yeah, Matt Gates.
the weird Republican? Yeah, who somehow has Teflon that off because he's never said sorry. But Milo did. That was his
So that's
downfall.
kind of, I didn't know all the details behind it. I just remember it going very awry for him, and he's not on Twitter anymore because he got
He got
blocked
banned
that.
from Twitter.
Yeah, he doesn't
Yeah,
have
and he was very racist towards is it Leslie Jones, the African American actress from the Ghostbusters sequel. And yeah, it was just a continuation of the Gamergate thing, right? He was doxing people, all sorts of stuff.
He's
just really horrible.
I was gonna say, he just really just as you said, 4chan personified, because you just thought, well, what am I even meant to take seriously? I think he's seriously a bad person while also being completely disingenuous and just saying things for jokes, for the lols, as they say.
I mean, the sad thing was, 10 years ago at the time, it seemed like a parody. But then, like looking back at what's happened in the last few years, it actually was tapping into quite a deep vein of American political capital, right? Like,
yeah, true, absolutely. So I think he's interesting in that, like, onto the tiering. If you'd asked me at the peak of his power, I'd say he was an S tier, but now he feels like he's an F tier.
He dropped off so quickly, right? Yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah.
I think once he got banned from Twitter, where most of his audience were, and again, undoubtedly a lot of them are probably Russian Twitter bots, because he was sowing a lot of dissent. I think, funnily enough, like months later, he was begging to get paid speaker fees to appear at some furry conference, and it was just incredible how dramatic his fall was.
He's really had to come out like cap in hand, like begging like both of his fans for a little bit of money, because he just completely fell off.
So, can I give someone a high score for entertainment, even if I didn't like it? Like, is that?
I think so. I think if you can, to some degree, objectively.
I've never been to a Britney Spears concert, but she clearly is entertaining for some.
Okay, now I know you're lying. Lying.
You know fine well she puts on a hell of a show, Chris.
She does, clearly. And so did he. Like, he was... he captured all the fucking headlines. I think his entertainment and his grift were so strongly intertwined. I think he scores highly for that alone.
Yeah. Even if I didn't personally find him entertaining to watch, like the whole circus around him was often entertaining as well, because he'd say something, people would respond, it would be in the news. It was always interesting at the very least. Do you know what I mean? It was always just like, what are we witnessing here? Because he was almost like a kind of a jester or something like that, which is almost sounds too complimentary. You know, he genuinely awful, like he wasn't just a clown, but he had that vibe about him. He was just
But
like witty and assertive.
again,
He
it's
was
like
kind of-
it's like wrestling, right? The whole thing was a circus,
true,
and he was the first person that came out in clown makeup, and like really before that, people thought they had to take it seriously, and he was the first person that didn't, and I think that's why he was so entertaining. It's why I think he's smarter than most of the people on this list.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's
His
probably like a
damage
4.
to
Sorry, I don't think he's
I mean,
quite as-
I know that's controversial to say, but he does write a good fucking column. And he avoids some of the weirder dead ends that the right tends to go down, right? He was never that interested in some of their stupider points, right? Like,
yeah,
he was
true,
mostly
true.
focusing
Yeah,
on
he's just
getting
cle-
Trump
he's-
elected and was part
Yeah.
of the right rocket, clearly.
Yeah.
How damaging was he to society? He was a big part of the Proud Boys and Trump's election, I think. As weird as that sounds to say, just like you had these African Americans coming out and saying Trump's not racist, I think he was one of the I'm gay and Trump's not homophobic sort of shields that the Republican Party has to play in order to get elected.
I think he used to score quite high on this for all the reasons you just said, but then this is the main thing where I think now he's just such a meme, he's just such a kind of cultural reference that he's not even a cultural reference in support of right-wing things. I think now he's just known to be a joke, and if people are referencing him, it's just as a wind-up and a kind of like, I think it's just, I think he's almost like Dave Rubin.
So that's
good for society now, because we can point and laugh at him and realize that we're kind of past that. I don't know, maybe I'm being naive, but I don't feel like he's...
No, you're right, but that makes his scoring hard, though, right? Because in his prime, as you say, he would have been S. Now he's probably less clout than Dave Rubin. So let me try and score it by that. I think in 10 years, will the world look back with a smirk on Milo Yiannipolis?
Oh, what kind of smirk, though? Well, it depends what that smirk is. I think
Well, different people, different smirks, right?
Yeah. I almost liken him to, like, I don't know, like, think of like a 60s or 70s like rock band who were really, really big and then just kind of like disappeared. Do you know what I mean? Like they had like 1 or 2 great albums, and then they just disappeared. This is like the analogy compared to like, I don't know, the Beatles, who are just like, oh, they're cemented as a classic. He's kind of more of a, I don't even know, even though I love them, he's kind of more of a Beach Boys in a way, because something just unraveled and they weren't able to maintain that success and their reputation was trashed. That's kind of what he is. So maybe that puts him in like a C or B tier, because if you can't ignore the legacy of what he was at the time, but now he's kind of he's not really anything, is he?
Yeah. Mal, as an outsider, are you feeling B vibes? Do you think he's a Tim Paul or a Sam Harris?
I mean, based on everything that we've covered so far and the things I've learned in the framework I've kind of created, I would say C sounds about right, especially if he has like really had a big drop off.
I think so.
Because you kind of, it's definitely worth looking at from a legacy standpoint, and the idea of looking 10 years ahead and looking at the prominence from beforehand. But I think really to rate it and score it accurately, kind of have to look at the sort of current standings of things.
So interesting. He might be about to make a comeback. Has anyone heard that he is now a staffer on, is it Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Lord.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah, he's joined her campaign. Yeah.
That's one crazy train to hitch your wagon to.
I think they're match made in heaven. Or in hell.
Yeah, that's actually kind of amazing.
How do you feel like that adds any sense of legitimacy to her moving forward, or do you think that is just going to add more spectacle? Because that's what essentially that's what she is. She is like a lot of people here, spectacle. And I'm curious.
I'm just trying to get my head around her name next to the statement legitimacy.
Yeah,
and
a bit of a stretch.
Square that knot. there's no way to add legitimacy to anything she does. Like, it's. Do you know when a meme becomes deep fried,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
so meta and weird? She just feels like the square root of QAnon. Like, it's just bizarre. It's embarrassing. But you know, Boris Johnson's our prime minister, so
There's a weird world in which
who
we
are we
live.
to
Yeah.
judge? Apparently, that was the best person the process should come up with, and this are the best YouTubers we could find for the day. I think we'll call it there, gentlemen. Obviously, there are many other people. I'd like to add some more ladies to this list. But yeah, I hope you found that as entertaining as I did.
It was certainly eye-opening for somebody that's kind of on the fringe of a lot of this.
Yeah.
I don't recommend you watch any of these videos, and I'm so sorry we had to. We watched them so you didn't have to.
Well, I appreciate it, fellas.
I'm frankly embarrassed because I've just watched all of these people over the course of the last 10 years anyway. Just like, I clearly do have too much time to waste.
Like a car crash, just couldn't.
It's a shame
turn
we
my
can't
head
touch
away.
on some of them because I think some of them are like. Someone like Douglas Murray is very interesting to me, but I won't go down.
Yeah, I mean, if I could have you back for another one, Jacob, I'd love to deep dive on Douglas Murray. I've even sort of prepared a more video essay style thing on Douglas Murray because I think
interesting. Yeah.
It's very important. Cool. Like, I think he is one of the last remaining intellectuals on the right, which I think is why he's so important to crack because so many of them just nonsense. But he's smart enough and has enough grift to know what points not to say out loud. So I really would like to get into Douglas Murray another time.
Yeah, I would love to.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We can stop recording now.
Cool. Right to you.